Hey guys, welcome back to our channel Knowledge Teen, and this is your friend Wasim, and today we are gonna see some interesting concept, that is class component versus functional components. Before we lean into what is class component and what is functional component, I would like you to request to do subscribe our channel, give us a like and press the bell icon below so that you can keep watching our upcoming videos. And now we'll just go ahead with the class component versus functional component. What is class component? Basically, class component was something which was created at the beginning of React. So everybody wanted to make it like a pure object-oriented programming where everything is class-based and we should create more classes, extend React internal classes, and so on and so forth. But later React thought, why do everything should be coming from a class? Why it should be pure object-oriented concepts, and why it should be like we do need some lifecycle architecture for it, that this is the phases. So we are gonna see what is that. But why do we need to make it more complicated? Why not use the basics of JavaScript? Which is like the basic flavor, which is like most interesting and absolute easiest thing to write in JavaScript, that is functions. So why are we not creating some functions and making it as a component? Why are we going with so many steps, creating so many classes, adding super methods, constructors, and what's or not, so many different types of methods? But instead of that, why don't we use just a simple function, call it as a component, return some HTML, and voila, your component works? Why don't we do that? So after giving it a good thought, React came up with functional components, which is very easy. So now functional components are simple JavaScript functions, okay, which are easy to write. Yes, we all know. And class components are pure object-oriented, you can say. Those have object-oriented concepts where you need to create a class which is inherited from your React components. So whatever components you create, those are nothing but simple classes, and you inherit them from React component class. Okay, there's a base class. So this was the first difference that was easy. Then another difference is, when using a class component, okay, how do you return some HTML, right? So we need to return some HTML. In functions, it is simple. You just return HTML, okay? That is, we call it as HTML, but that is not HTML in actual. That is JSX, JavaScript XML. So you can use all the HTML tags in JavaScript format. So there is a specific format that whenever we are going to do some coding, we are going to see what is the difference and what not. But all the tags in HTML, you can simply use it in JSX. Absolutely easy. Okay. Then the same thing, we need to return JSX in class components. We need to return JSX in your normal functional components. But functions, easy, return something directly. How you can return something from a class? You cannot return anything from a class. You need to have a method for that, right? So class component, React came with something called as render method. So you need to add another method into class component called as render, which will return your simple JSX. This is the second difference that we can see between class component and functional component. Point number 3, usually class component, there is very important concepts in class component. If you're learning or if you're working on class component, which you should not right now, because right now we are using React 17, right? Version 17, which is mainly based on your functional components. But let's talk, as we are discussing between the differences between both. Let's say that if some company is still using the old class-based components and you need to work on that, you should know a very, very important concept in class components only, that is its lifecycle architecture. We can simulate that in functional components, but we are not going to talk about it right now. We are going to see it when we are going to actually write some hooks. What are hooks? Another concept. We are going to see it later, but not now. We are just going to discuss something called as lifecycle architecture. That is, we have some different phases into lifecycle architecture. That is mounting phase, updating phase, unmounting phase. We are also not going to see this in this video. We are just comparing what is class component and what is functional component. But this is just a good to know knowledge that yes, there are some different lifecycle architecture and lifecycle phases that class component goes through, that you should be aware when you are coding in class components, which is absolutely not there in your functional components. You can simulate those, but it's optional. You don't have to write that. In class-based component also, it's not compulsory to go write that phases, but it goes through them. You have some different kind of functions which you can call, and you can go through the lifecycle phases of React class-based components. Easy. So what the third point was, React class-based component has some lifecycle architecture. Functional component can simulate those lifecycle architecture, but it has its own way of doing that. Easy. React gives some individual methods for class-based component regarding that. We are gonna see it in our upcoming videos. That was the third difference. The fourth, which is actually a valid as well as invalid point. Let's see how. Functional components was previously called as stateless functional components, or we used to call it as SFC. But right now we don't call it as stateless functional component. We call it as only functional components. Because the initial concept that was made, it was called as SFC because people used to think that functional components are stateless because it does not have any individual state of its own. I made it more simpler in terms of functional components are stateless because they don't have any state of their own. We used to think that. Whereas if we just come to class-based component needs to have a default state. Okay, and all the base logic was written in your class-based components. As a result, functional components were called as stateless, but class-based components were called as stateful components. Actually, it is invalid according to me. I have gone through the whole internet just regarding the searching of that, and React itself in one of the git pull, it said that it removed the stateless functional components from in one of the commit, and it only called the whole commit as functional component. Yes, so React functional component can have states, as well as we are gonna see it how in hooks again. Okay, hooks, very interesting concept. We are gonna see them. And second thing was, we were talking about logic, that class components have all the logic within itself, but functional components also can do that. Okay, so there is basically no comparison. As I said, it is valid as well as invalid point to be discussed, but I just wanted you to know that why it was called as stateful component and why it was called as stateless component before. Class component can also behave as stateless component, as well as functional component can behave as stateful component. Yeah. So both have their own pros as well as cons. We saw them one by one. These are some basic pros and cons of them. We can go in more in depth, but let's not do that because we are not gonna use class components in a future example. It is just good to know knowledge, okay, regarding class components, so that if in future if you're gonna work on them, you should know what is the major difference between class components and functional components. These are some major differences. Let's move ahead and see what actual difference is there in between your coding style. Okay, how we are gonna code some class-based components and how we are gonna code functional components. Let's see, compare it side by side and see how we are gonna see that. And coming back to our original site, React.js.org. Yeah, let me open just quickly the code sandbox, which is my favorite website, as I have previously said so many times. But I'll quickly remove. I'm just changing the app.js. We have seen this file in our previous video. If you have not seen that, please click on the link above and see our previous video, which was based on setup and installation and exploring the files. What files do we have? I have even given you some basic explanation on them. Please go ahead and visit that. Coming back to our current example, okay, here we have simple app.js, index.js. So app.js is nothing but our app component. To show you more, in index.js we are rendering app. So our component's name should be app. Okay, you can give any name, that's okay. But for now we are just writing something in app component. So we are gonna see app. We are just gonna write app component. So let's see the first example of class-based component. How we are gonna write class-based component. I'll just create a class called as app, which extends React.Component. So this is the way, as I said, that React class-based components inherit their own components from React.Component. So React.Component is my base class now. But before I inherit that, see, it is not understanding what React is. So let me import React from React. The best thing about React is you can just export and import anything that you want. This is the best part. Absolutely, I enjoy doing this. Okay. And you can enjoy the same flavor in your Angular too. But we are learning React. So this is how it is interesting, because this is not some concept which is in only in React. This is the concept in your ES6. Importing and exporting comes in ES6 TypeScript. So these concepts can be reused in all the technologies which are using ES6. Okay, so that's easy. So now I simply export. As I said, I import something. If you are importing something, you're creating something, you need to export it so that someone else can import it, right? A simple example is goods. If you're importing something out of India, some other country might be importing it. If you're some other country is exporting something, India might be importing it. So if something is exported, that can be imported. Simple concept. So now I'm using the same thing. I'm importing React from React, but I'm exporting my own component. So if someone needs it, they can just import it and use it. Export default app. Simple. Let's not see the error. That's okay. It is just asking for the render function. But now this is the base layout of how a class component is written. As I said that I'm exporting my app component, so it should be imported somewhere. If you go to index.js, here it is already imported. See, now it's asking for render function. Let's write a render. It's a function, so simple render, open bracket, close bracket, and as I said, that render needs to return some JSX. What is JSX? Simple HTML. I just write hello class component. It's a simple text that we usually write, and save it. And yes, see, you can see. Okay, just remove it, and there are no errors in the console. So it's quite easy to write class components. So this is how a class component is written. Let's see how to write a functional component. So I don't need anything. I'll just comment it out for now, and let's see how to write a functional component. So there are two ways to write a functional component. We'll go both the ways. Both are correct in their own way. Export default. You can create a simple, as I said, it's a simple JavaScript function. Export default function. I say app, round brackets, curly brackets, and a function normally returns something. I just say h1 hello functional component. I just close my h1 and save. Just refresh it. It's just filing something, and yes, see, it's one line or probably two lines. But this is the way to simply create a functional component. No extending something, no doing some additional work. As you're not extending React component, so you are not taking all the things that are written in React.Component base class and putting it in your app component. So the code is reduced drastically, right? Because as you are extending it from something, so that means you are just copying some React code from the React component and putting it in your app component, which is like bad. But functional component does not have that. There is no import, there is no extending or anything. It's simply, as I said, you are exporting this. That's okay, and you are creating this normal. It's a plain function, and you're just returning HTML. That's it. JSX, not HTML. You can even do this. I just write functional app, and even you can export it in the next line, just to be like this. This is also okay. Okay, come on, let me just refresh it. See, this is also okay, because it's not compulsory in functional component also that to write it in the same line as we did here in line number 8. We are doing the same thing in line number 14. It's just a way. I was just writing it in the one line. Both the ways are fine. But as I said that we are using ES6, even you can, I'll just move it like this. Even you can use ES6 way of doing this. I'll just write create const. In ES6 you create a function like this, okay, using fat arrows. So this is your fat arrow, and this is a normal function that the parenthesis, this is nothing but an anonymous function which you are assigning to your constant app, okay, constant variable. This is some ES6 part, okay, and this is the way, basically just remember that this is the way you usually write a simple functional component. See how easy it is, it's quite easy to write. So as we were discussing about functional components and class-based components, you have seen both the way of writing a class-based component and a functional component. I will just give you a flavor of what was lifecycle architecture in class-based component. We are gonna discuss it in depth in our upcoming videos, but for now let's just taste the flavor of what is class-based component and its lifecycle architecture. I'll just remove functional component for now. You have seen how easy it is, and we are gonna create all the functional components in our upcoming videos. So we are not gonna create class component, it's old school, right? So we should not use old school. Till in 17.0.2 we are using functional components. Tomorrow it might be something else. That's a different story for tomorrow. If something new comes, we are gonna learn that too. So I'll just uncomment this whole thing, and now, as you know, we have a class, and whenever a class is called, the basic thing that you usually get into a class is nothing but a constructor. I can have some properties in this, right? Usually a constructor is called using super, some props, and if you see there are some, I'll just refresh it. I have called the constructor and I have returned the render, but it is missing something, okay? It is a useless constructor, it is saying, because there is nothing, no state or nothing has been declared in this. There is some problem in this. It's a useless constructor and all that stuff. But this is how you usually call a constructor. So there were some more methods, okay? As I said, there are 3 phases in a normal class-based component: mounting phase, updating phase, and unmounting phase. We are going to just see some flavors, how and when what is called. If I just write a console.log in constructor, and also I just write console.log in render, just do that and save it. I'll just refresh it. See, the first method in a class, always the first method is called as, which is called, that is constructor, okay? In any language, basically in all the object-oriented programming, the first method, whenever a class, an object of a class is created, the constructor is called. That's the default thing we know. The same principle is being followed here. Render, the second thing that is called, which is render. So constructor is something which is called before the render. That means before I write hello class component into our DOM, now the whole concept from video 1 till now, virtual DOM, we have seen all of them. So before we write hello class component, something is called, that is your virtual DOM. And in virtual DOM, before virtual DOM writes something to your DOM, this whole constructor is called, okay? There is one more method. So just to show you what is this, let me just see. React lifecycle hooks or lifecycle architecture, whatever you want to call it. Let me just open it, go to the details, and if you see here, see, there's this mounting phase. I told you this. There are different type of phases: mounting phase, updating phase, and unmounting phase. All of them have their individual functions, individual methods, and these methods, let us just try one of the method that we have, static derived state from props. You can just call the same method over here, and I can just write console.log in, let me just call this, okay, and return something. I don't want to return anything, so I'm just returning null. Quickly do a refresh. There is no state in this, so let me just add a state. This dot state equal to, I'll just add like name tests, some default variables, some default values. If you see, the first method that is called is constructor. The second method that is called is get derived state from props. Then my actual rendering starts. So even get derived state from props is a method if you want to modify your logic before the whole component is rendered. This is the way we are gonna see this in detail. I'm just giving a hint of it. I'll just add the last method. That is my component did mount. I'll just call this method the same one. I'll just add console.log and component did mount. I'll just return from here too and refresh. If you see, this is the mounting phase. First, my constructor is called. Second, my get derived state from props is called. So as I said, before writing anything to DOM, if you just want to modify some logic, modify some variables, you want to do some additional code here and there, then you can write it in get derived state from props method. Then you have your render, even if I have written component did mount first, but render is always called. So your DOM is being updated. After DOM is updated, if you want to do something, you can do it in component did mount. So just to give you a simple example, you can call all the APIs, okay, all the Ajax calls, Ajax requests into component did mount, because every time you want to do anything, you want to do it after your DOM is loaded. So all the API calls should come under your component did mount. Okay, this is how the whole lifecycle architecture works. We are gonna see them in our next video, but this was just a short example of how this whole lifecycle architecture works in class-based component. We have seen what is class-based component. We have seen what is functional component. We have just seen some additional examples between it. I hope you like this video. If you do like, I again say, please subscribe and do let us know in the comments what you want to know better into this video. I hope you keep liking us and give us a thumbs up. Thank you. Keep learning.